I've been a BBC radio producer for 35 years and I make arts and history documentaries. And whenever I make a programme, I think, how is this going to be received in the home? How are people going to hear it? What are they going to make of it? And as 2022 approached, the 100th anniversary of the founding of the BBC, and therefore, in effect, the beginning of British radio, I began to think about the same questions 100 years previously. Of course, the impact was far, far greater. The word broadcasting didn't exist except as a very specialist agricultural term. People literally had not heard the word broadcasting. Radio was the first form of mass entertainment in the home. The idea of voices from beyond one's own community, the news, the pips, those very popular SOS broadcasts, which we don't have any longer, a sense of a unifying network that I could be, I don't know, in Truro listening to the same programme as my distant cousin in Aberdeen or whatever. These were very, very entirely new ideas. And of course, radio is not an unknown subject. There's been masses and masses of historical coverage and research of broadcasting, broadcasts, broadcasters. But what I'm interested in is listeners, the experience of the listeners. And there's been very, very little about that, partly because radio was taken up so quickly and it's by definition a very fugitive medium, and partly because what there was tended to be funny little interesting reports that came via what we would now call the senior management team at the BBC. So Sir John Reith, who was the first Director General of the BBC, writes in his diary, I had dinner with an Oxford Don, he doesn't think this new contraption's going to last very long. Or I had lunch with the Archbishop of Canterbury, whose wife asked, is it necessary to open the window to listen to the radio, to let the waves in? That kind of thing. There was very, very little indeed. And then I was lucky enough to get a commission to write a book for Bodleian Publishing and to curate an exhibition, and very lucky indeed also to get this term's Marconi Fellowship. And the first thing I did was look at the John Johnson collection, which, if you don't know, is a wonderful collection of ephemera, of pamphlets and menus and brochures and advertising copy, which Julianne Lambert is the queen of. Unfortunately, she's not here today, but she's been enormously helpful. And I have waded my way through the 12 boxes on wireless. And what you see here, up until here, in effect, is the way that the BBC itself, this new startup, the BBC, and the manufacturers of the gadgets, the radio gadgets and the headphones, because nearly everybody listened on headphones, and the people who came in and decided that this radio craze was worth publishing a magazine on. There are masses and masses of very short-run magazines. The way that they wanted the BBC, or rather radio, to be seen. And what they want is quite complicated. They want it to be seen that this is a 20th century, modern, new, exciting, forward-looking medium. But they also want to be very reassuring, and sort of in a rather contradictory way, they also want to reassure people in the early 1920s that actually this is sort of going to take people back to the comfort of the Victorian fireside, the good times of women by the fireside, of family life that you hear about in parlour songs, for example, that the First World War is over and now there's something very comforting and reassuring, and about radio, that stray son of yours who went off to war, came back again and is now out every night at the music hall, will come back and sit with his grandmother and listen to the radio, if you like. So much of what you see here, this very attractive colourful material is a kind of totally valid marketing. I mean, many of the things that they said radio would be, it was. It did bring people back into the home. People did love it. It did educate, inform, and so on. But having looked at it and looked at it again, I felt that I wasn't really hearing, if you like, the listeners. I was listening out for the listeners, and I wasn't really hearing her or his voice. And it was at that stage that I decided to look up a brochure, which is here. It's a little BBC brochure. It was published, unfortunately, actually, it came out in the week that the Second World War started, so it didn't get very much coverage. But it's a bit of very early BBC listener research. To begin with, the BBC didn't do any listener research. Frankly, it was going to tell the listeners what they thought. I mean, it was very firm about this. But bit by bit, it realised that it really needed to do some listener research. And the little bit of research it did was focused in a small working class district of Bristol called Barton Hill, where there were two women who were already working, who were associated with the BBC. And what they wrote is called Broadcasting in Everyday Life, a survey of the social effects of the coming of broadcasting, conducted by Hilda Jennings and Winifred Gill. And as I say, you can see it here. And I ordered it up in special collections because Winifred Gill happened, for totally other reasons, to leave her archive to the Bodleian. And I lifted it up and I looked at it, and you can't see the front cover, but BBC early publications are lovely. It was a very handsome, it's a little handsome red pamphlet, 1 shilling, and full of really valuable information that really expanded. I did begin to feel I was hearing the listener. And then underneath it, and I tell you, I was so excited I had to not go down to the Headley tea room, but go down to the expensive cafe and get a proper cup of coffee and a bit of carrot cake. I was so excited. I love the Headley tea room, but I do, but the coffee isn't great. And that's the end of my fellowship, I think, probably. Anyway, what I found was here, which in a way doesn't look so attractive. And what it was the reporter's notebook and another exercise book that Winifred Gill used when she went out and about in Barton Hill doing her research. And it has masses more material, but it also has lots and lots of, it builds up an idea of real people and with real names. You have, Mr. James, the Welsh grocer, Mrs. Britton, the newsagent, Alderman Hennessy, Eileen and George, Joyce and Les, Eunice and Ken, my favourite, who's called Miss Vile, but is in fact very modest and thoughtful about radio. So you begin to give names to listeners, and then I began to do a bit of cross-checking, if you like, and to see what was left in and what was left out. I mean, to be fair, they couldn't include all of the research, and sometimes to make comparisons. So I've actually left it open on the published version, where you get a man who's changed his hobby because of the arrival of radio, and he's become a real, what we call radio hobbyist, constructing his own radio. But if you compare it with the handwritten version, you get a much broader and frankly much uglier picture of a man who actually has spent all his time in the past in the pub, has drunk too much, has come home, been abusive, and now things have changed. So you get that kind of thing, and I've tried to do as much cross-checking, if you like, as possible. And now I'm feeling that I am hearing the listener. So just a few more examples. Women were said, and you can see from the rather posed images, to love radio, that it enhanced the lives women in the home, and you have to remember married women were nearly all at home at this period. They did love radio, but again there are awful examples of men using radio as a form of coercive control really within the home. Children absolutely love Children's Hour, as some of these images show, but actually what is not included in the published brochure, published pamphlet, is the fact that a lot of them actually fancied something that was more fun, more lightweight, less educational, more variety, and they, by the mid-1930s, are switching over to Radio Normandy and Radio Luxembourg, and so again it's a much bigger, more complex picture. And there's very interesting things about class that if you look in detail you find, again, for example with women, as it happens, that women love listening to the radio, but they absolutely loathe and abhor all of the cookery programs and the recipes, and there's a really good reason for that. And Winifred Gill reports again and again, but she only includes one version of it in the final publication. She says, these women say, well, what's a garnish? I haven't got time for that. These women who are broadcasting, they've got cooks, they've got servants. I haven't got time for that kind of thing. So there's very interesting ideas about what an immensely class-laden activity radio listening, if you like, becomes. And now what I'm doing, none of this has invalidated the wonderful John Johnson material. It's like a kind of conversation between the two. And I'm beginning to hear, if you're old enough to remember Under Milk Wood, I begin now to feel I've got a kind of radio play in my head of voices telling me what it was like to listen to the radio, how it changed their lives. It was really transformative for some people. For other people, it just gave them something to sing along to while they peeled the potatoes, but at many levels, it was very, very transformative. And I love that conversation, if you like, between the two. And of course, one little area of Bristol is, one little area of Bristol, but it also helped me think about different people from different classes across the country, the difference between a housewife in Bristol and Virginia Woolf and her listening experience. I began to get a complex, another conversation, if you like. And finally, I want, the other exciting thing that's done is, in a way, my starting point was a recognition that everybody knows now, which is linear radio, what we call linear radio, which is I'll turn it on in the house or the car. It is still actually alive and well, but of course today we don't, some people don't even call radio radio, they call it audio. I have a 24-year-old daughter and she listens to masses, but she doesn't really listen to the radio. And I've become very interested in the way that downloads, podcasting, all of which are hugely enriching, are changing or certainly affecting our audio consumption. Perhaps rather more fragmenting, which is a worrying thing today, less unifying. Are we slightly listening in our own silos and being brought things that that the algorithm will know that we want because of what we've listened to already? So in a way, from 1922 to 2022, and I think onwards into the next 100 years, what radio was like then is it's really important to think about it because of how it's changing now, today.